In the heart of Yosemite National Park, where ancient trees stand as silent witnesses to the passage of time, a seasoned ranger's routine patrol would soon unravel into a haunting encounter that would test the very limits of compassion and resolve. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the rugged landscape, an unfamiliar sound pierced the tranquil air, beckoning him toward a fate intertwined with a mother bear's desperate plea for help. Deep in the heart of Yosemite National Park, the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows over the rugged landscape. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine trees and damp earth. In this beautiful yet wild place, a seasoned park ranger named David made his way along a winding trail. David had spent many years protecting this land, and he knew every bend and vista like an old friend. As he walked, he listened to the sounds of nature around him, the chirping of birds, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the distant babbling of a brook. Each sound was a reminder of the vibrant life surrounding him. He felt a profound connection to the forest, as if it whispered secrets to him through the wind. But today was different. A strange sound broke the usual symphony of nature. It was a low, guttural moan that echoed through the trees, sending a chill down David's spine. He paused, his heart racing as he quickly assessed the situation. He reached for the radio, clipped to his belt, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. David scanned the area, his eyes sharp and alert. The forest seemed to hold its breath, anticipating what would happen next. Suddenly, he spotted something moving through the thick underbrush. It was a massive grizzly bear, but something was terribly wrong. Instead of displaying the usual power and confidence of a predator, the bear moved slowly, almost limping. David's heart sank as he noticed the bear's matted fur and the pain in its eyes. This was not just any bear. It was a mother, and she was in desperate need of help. As the bear approached, David could see a dark crimson stain on her flank, a clear indication of a serious injury. His instincts kicked in. He knew he had to act quickly. As the bear came closer, David spoke soothingly, trying to calm her. "Easy there, girl," he murmured, taking slow steps forward. To his surprise, the bear lowered herself to the ground, resting her massive head on her paws. It was a gesture of vulnerability, a silent plea for help. David knelt beside her, careful not to startle her further. He reached out to examine the wound, his heart aching at the sight. The gash in her side was deep and inflamed, a clear sign that she was suffering. He realized that he couldn't treat her injury in the field. He needed to get her to the park's veterinary clinic as soon as possible. But how could he move such a large animal, especially one in her condition? David's mind raced with questions. He remembered the bear's cubs. Where were they? The thought of them being alone and vulnerable filled him with urgency. He made a silent vow. He would do everything in his power to save this bear and her family. As the fading light painted the forest in shades of purple and gray, David assessed the situation. He needed help, fast. Reaching for his radio, he contacted headquarters, keeping his voice steady despite the rising tension. "Ranger Station, this is Ranger David. I have an adult female grizzly with a severe laceration, possibly infected. Location about 2 miles south of Eagle Peak Trailhead. Requesting vet support and a transport team." The response was swift. "Copy that, Ranger David. We're dispatching a team now. ETA approximately 1 hour. Maintain visual contact with the bear, but do not attempt to approach or engage. Prioritize your safety." David nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. Help was on the way, but the next hour felt like an eternity. He needed to keep the bear calm and prevent her from wandering off or succumbing to her injuries. He spoke softly to her, sharing stories about the park, trying to keep her aware and engaged. "Help is coming. Just hang in there," he reassured her. The bear, her breathing labored, seemed to understand. She remained still, her eyes fixed on David, a flicker of trust shining through her pain. While waiting for help, David rummaged through his backpack for something to comfort her. He found a half-full bottle of water and cautiously extended it toward her. To his amazement, the bear gently took the bottle from his hand and began to lap at the water, grateful for the cool relief. As the minutes passed, David kept a watchful eye on her condition. He noticed her breathing becoming shallower, her body weakening. The thought of her cubs was never far from his mind. He had to find them. He needed to reunite them with their mother, but first, he had to ensure she survived. Twilight deepened, and soon, David heard the distant thrum of a helicopter. His heart leaped with hope. Help had arrived. He grabbed his flashlight and signaled the approaching aircraft, guiding them toward the clearing. The helicopter landed, creating a whirlwind of dust and leaves. A team of park rangers and a veterinarian rushed toward him, their faces etched with concern. "How is she?" Sarah, the park vet, asked urgently. "Weak but stable," David replied, stepping aside to allow her to examine the bear. Sarah worked quickly, assessing the wound and administering antibiotics and fluids. The bear, exhausted and in pain, submitted to the treatment, her eyes flickering between David and Sarah, reflecting gratitude. With the bear stabilized, the team carefully loaded her onto a stretcher, preparing to airlift her to the clinic. As they lifted her into the helicopter, David felt a pang of sadness. He had come to care for this creature, and now she was being taken away. But he knew it was for the best. Watching the helicopter disappear into the night sky, David turned back toward the darkening forest, his resolve strengthened. He had a promise to keep, to find the bear's cubs. As dawn broke over the valley, the soft hues of rose and gold painted the sky. David, fueled by a strong cup of coffee and a renewed sense of purpose, set out to find the cubs. He knew they couldn't be far from where he had encountered their mother. Instinctively, they would likely stay close to her last known location. David retraced his steps, his eyes scanning the forest floor for any signs of the cubs, tracks, scat, or even a disturbed patch of leaves that might indicate their presence. He imagined them small and vulnerable, huddled together for warmth and comfort, unaware of their mother's fate. Hours passed under the growing sun. David's initial optimism began to wane, replaced by a gnawing worry. Had the cubs wandered off? Had they fallen prey to predators? He pushed those thoughts aside, refusing to give in to despair. He had to believe they were out there, waiting to be reunited with their mother. The forest, however, remained silent. David continued his search, venturing deeper into the wilderness. He climbed over fallen logs, waded through shallow streams, and kept his senses on high alert. Just as he was about to admit defeat, a faint sound reached his ears, a soft whimper, barely audible above the rustling leaves. His heart raced as he froze, straining to pinpoint the source of the sound. He crept forward cautiously, careful not to disturb the tranquility of the forest. The whimpering grew louder, guiding him toward a thicket of ferns and bushes. Gently, he parted the foliage and gasped at the sight before him. Two tiny cubs, no bigger than house cats, huddled together beneath a fallen log. Their rich cinnamon fur blended perfectly with the forest floor, and their wide, innocent eyes stared up at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. David's heart melted at the sight. They were so small, so vulnerable, yet so full of life. Kneeling down slowly, he extended his hand toward them, whispering softly, "It's okay, little ones. I'm here to help." The cubs, wary of this human intruder, retreated further into their hiding place. David remained patient, his movements gentle and reassuring. He spoke softly, telling them stories of their mother, of her strength and courage, of the love she had for them. Reaching into his backpack, he pulled out a handful of dried berries, offering them to the cubs. Driven by hunger and perhaps sensing his kindness, they emerged cautiously from their hiding place. They sniffed the berries tentatively, their tiny noses twitching before finally taking them from his hand. David smiled, his heart filled with relief. He had found them, but now he had to get them back to the clinic to reunite them with their mother. However, a new challenge arose: how to transport them through the rugged terrain. The cubs were surprisingly strong, their tiny claws sharp and their instinct to squirm ever present. David needed a plan. He glanced around and spotted his ranger jacket, discarded earlier in the heat of the search. An idea sparked in his mind. Carefully, he folded the jacket, creating a makeshift sling, and gently placed one of the cubs inside. The cub, initially startled, soon settled down, its warmth radiating through the fabric. The second cub proved a bit more challenging. Reluctant to leave it behind, David decided to improvise. He opened his backpack, creating a cozy space within, and gently placed the second cub inside. He left the top slightly open, allowing the cub to peek out, its curious eyes taking in the world from its new vantage point. With his precious cargo secured, David began the arduous journey back to the trailhead. The terrain was uneven, with rocks and fallen branches strewn about. He moved slowly, carefully placing each step, mindful of the delicate creatures he carried. Initially, the cubs whined with fear, but they gradually settled into the rhythm of his movement. The gentle swaying of the sling, the warmth of his body, and the occasional reassuring pat soothed them. As David continued, he felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. As the sun began to dip again, casting long shadows across the forest floor, David finally reached the trailhead. A wave of relief washed over him as he saw the familiar sight of the park ranger's vehicle. He carefully removed the cubs from their makeshift carriers and placed them in a secure transport crate provided by the waiting rangers. Watching the vehicle depart, carrying the cubs toward the veterinary clinic, David felt a sense of accomplishment. He had played a vital role in their rescue. Exhausted but exhilarated, he leaned against his truck, taking a moment to catch his breath. He closed his eyes, replaying the events of the day. The encounter with the mother bear, the search for the cubs, and the challenging journey back. He felt a deep connection to these creatures and a sense of responsibility for their well-being. The veterinary clinic was a sanctuary of healing nestled amidst the wilderness. After a much-needed shower and a change of clothes, David made his way to the observation room overlooking the bear enclosure. A mix of anticipation and trepidation filled him as he prepared to witness the reunion between the mother bear, Hope, and her cubs. Sarah, the veterinarian, greeted him with a warm smile. "David, you're just in time," she said, leading him toward the window. Hope has been quite restless, sensing her cubs are near. As David peered into the enclosure, his heart swelled with emotion. Hope lay on a bed of soft straw, her wounds cleaned and bandaged. Her eyes were filled with longing, mirroring his own. Nearby, the cubs whimpered softly, their tiny paws reaching out toward their mother. The moment of reunion was nothing short of magical. As the cubs were carefully introduced into the enclosure, Hope's demeanor transformed. She rose to her feet, her maternal instincts kicking in. Her eyes softened with a tender love as the cubs rushed toward her. The room filled with the sound of deep purring, resonating through the air as the cubs nuzzled against her. Their tiny paws kneaded her fur, and their whimpers turned into contented sighs. David watched, tears welling in his eyes. He had witnessed the raw power of nature and the unbreakable bond between mother and offspring. Over the next few days, David became a regular visitor at the clinic. He spent hours observing the bears, studying their interactions, and marveling at their resilience. He learned to distinguish the cubs, each with distinct personalities. Scout, the bolder of the two, was always exploring and venturing further from his mother's side, his curiosity insatiable. Willow, on the other hand, was more cautious, preferring to stay close to Hope, her eyes wide with wonder as she watched her brother's adventures. As David spent time with them, he noticed that Hope, initially wary of humans, grew to trust him. She would approach the edge of the enclosure, allowing him to gently scratch behind her ears. The cubs, too, seemed to enjoy his company, often directing their playful antics at him. David felt a deep connection to these creatures, a sense of shared experience that transcended language. One afternoon, as he sat observing the bears, Sarah approached him with a thoughtful expression. "David," she began, "we're planning to release Hope and her cubs back into the wild soon. We're looking for someone to monitor their progress and ensure they adapt well. Someone who understands their needs and their connection to this place." David's heart leaped at the offer. "I'd be honored," he replied, his voice filled with sincerity. The prospect of being involved in their return to the wild filled him with purpose. He felt a responsibility to protect them and ensure their successful reintegration into their natural habitat. In the days leading up to the release, David immersed himself in preparations. He studied maps of the release site, consulted with wildlife experts, and familiarized himself with the bear's individual needs. The chosen location was a secluded valley deep within the park, far from human settlements and disturbances. It was a pristine wilderness, teeming with life, a perfect habitat for a family of bears seeking a fresh start. David visited the site several times, scouting the terrain and identifying potential food sources. He ensured there were no threats in the area. He also spent countless hours with Hope and her cubs, observing their behavior and strengthening the bond he had formed with them. On the day of the release, a mix of excitement and apprehension hung in the air. David, along with Sarah and a team of park rangers, accompanied the bears to their new home. The journey was filled with a quiet anticipation, a sense of shared purpose, and a deep respect for the creatures they were entrusted with. As the transport trailer doors opened, Hope emerged cautiously, her cubs trailing behind her. They paused for a moment, taking in the sights and smells of their new home. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. With a sudden burst of energy, Hope led her cubs into the underbrush, disappearing into the dense foliage. David watched them go, feeling a bittersweet sense of loss wash over him. He had grown attached to these bears, and the thought of saying goodbye was difficult. But deep down, he knew this was where they belonged, in the wild, living free. His role had now shifted from caregiver to guardian. David would continue to monitor their progress, ensuring they adapted well to their new environment. He would be their silent protector, a watchful presence in the shadows, intervening only when necessary. David stood at the edge of the dense forest, his heart filled with mixed emotions. He had watched Hope and her cubs grow, from vulnerable creatures in need of help to confident bears ready to reclaim their place in the wild. Though saying goodbye was hard, he understood that this was the only way for them to thrive. Now, with his role shifting from caregiver to guardian, David set out to monitor their progress. He felt a deep sense of responsibility to ensure their safety, knowing that the wilderness could be both beautiful and dangerous. He quickly established a remote observation post, equipped with binoculars and a camera, allowing him to track their movements without disturbing their natural behaviors. Each day, David hiked into the valley, his senses alert as he quietly observed the bears from a distance. He documented their interactions, marveling at their resilience and adaptability. Hope, now a skilled hunter and protector, taught her cubs the ways of the wild. David witnessed them learning to fish in the crystal-clear streams, forage for berries in the sun-drenched meadows, and climb trees with the agility of seasoned climbers. As the days turned into weeks, David felt a profound connection to these bears. He was no longer just a park ranger. He was the guardian of the valley, a silent witness to Hope and her cubs' journey back to the wild. He often found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned from them, about survival, family, and the importance of protecting nature. One sunny morning, as David settled into his observation post, he noticed a significant change in Hope and her cubs. They were now almost fully grown, exhibiting a confidence that filled him with pride. The cubs, Scout and Willow, were no longer the timid little ones he had rescued. They had become adept at navigating their environment. However, David also sensed a tension in the air that day. The forest, usually alive with the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves, felt eerily quiet. David scanned the valley with his binoculars, searching for any sign of the bears, but they were nowhere to be seen. A growing unease settled in his stomach as he strained his ears, trying to catch any sounds that might betray their presence. Driven by instinct, David decided to investigate. He packed his gear and ventured into the valley, following faint trails left by the bears. The silence felt heavy, as if the forest were holding its breath. David's senses were heightened, his heart racing with concern for Hope and her cubs. As he moved deeper into the wilderness, he stumbled upon a sight that made his blood run cold. A group of men, their faces obscured by camouflage paint, were setting traps and snares along the bears' frequented paths. Their movements were swift and practiced, and the glint of their eyes hinted at a predatory nature. David's heart pounded in his chest as he recognized the telltale signs of poachers. They were breaking the law, endangering the lives of the very creatures he had vowed to protect. A wave of anger surged through him, mixed with a fierce protectiveness for Hope and her cubs. He knew he had to act quickly to protect them, but felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He was outnumbered and outgunned. He needed backup, but contacting the Rangers would take time, precious time that Hope and her cubs might not have. David took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he had to do. He decided to confront the poachers, hoping to stall them until the authorities arrived. Stepping out from behind a thicket of trees, he called out, his voice booming through the silent forest. "This is protected land. Leave now or face the consequences." The poachers, startled by his sudden appearance, turned toward him with menacing glares. One of them, a burly man with a scarred face and cold eyes, sneered, "And who's going to stop us, old man?" His hand rested on the rifle slung across his shoulder, a clear warning. David stood his ground, refusing to back down. "I am," he declared, locking eyes with the poacher. Though fear gnawed at him, the thought of Hope and her cubs falling victim to these men fueled his courage. He engaged them in conversation, appealing to their sense of reason and reminding them of the laws they were breaking. He spoke passionately about the beauty of the wilderness, the sanctity of life, and the importance of preserving the delicate balance of nature. Although the poachers seemed unmoved by his words, he bought himself precious time. In the distance, he heard the faint sound of approaching sirens, a signal that help was on its way. Realizing they were trapped, the poachers began to abandon their equipment and fled into the dense forest. David watched them disappear, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced danger, risking his own life to protect the bears. He had fulfilled his promise and responsibility to Hope and her cubs. As the park rangers arrived, apprehending the fleeing poachers, David returned to his observation post, scanning the valley with anxiety. Where were Hope and her cubs? Had they witnessed the confrontation? Were they safe? Relief washed over him as he finally spotted them emerging from a hidden den, their eyes wide with curiosity but unharmed. Hope, sensing his presence, approached him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She nuzzled him gently, a gesture of thanks from one protector to another. David's heart swelled with emotion as he reached out to stroke her fur, making a silent promise to continue watching over them. Winter descended upon the valley, blanketing the landscape in a pristine layer of white. The air grew still and silent, the once vibrant forest hushed beneath the weight of the snow. David, bundled in layers of warm clothing, continued his vigil, his presence a comforting constant in the bears' lives. He tracked their movements, observing their strategies for finding food and shelter in the harsh conditions. Despite the challenges of winter, David marveled at the resilience of Hope and her cubs. They adapted remarkably, utilizing their instincts to survive even in the face of adversity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a rosy glow over the snow-covered landscape, David witnessed a scene that etched itself into his memory. Hope and her cubs, nestled beside her, stood atop a rocky outcrop, their silhouettes outlined against the fiery sky. They seemed to embody the very spirit of the wilderness, their strength and grace a testament to nature's enduring power. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, David found himself reflecting on his own life and purpose. He had dedicated his career to protecting the wilderness, but it was through his encounter with Hope and her cubs that he truly understood nature's power, fragility, and enduring beauty. He realized that his role as a park ranger extended beyond enforcing regulations and ensuring visitor safety. He was a guardian, a protector, a steward of the land and its inhabitants. He was a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the wild creatures that called this place home. This realization deepened his commitment to his work and to the wild itself. As spring arrived, bringing with it renewed hope and vitality, the snow melted, revealing vibrant green shoots of new life. The forest awoke from its winter slumber, its symphony of sounds filling the air once more. Hope and her cubs emerged from their winter den, their coats sleek and shiny, their eyes sparkling with renewed energy. David watched them with a sense of pride and accomplishment. He had witnessed their transformation, their growth, and their journey back to the wild. He knew they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, their spirits strong and their instincts sharp. One day, as David sat observing the bears from his hidden post, he noticed a change in their behavior. Hope, now guiding her cubs with newfound confidence, led them on longer excursions, teaching them advanced hunting techniques and encouraging them to explore new territories. David understood that the time had come for the cubs to venture out on their own, to establish their own territory and continue the cycle of life. As he watched the cubs with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, he felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss. But also, a deep sense of joy filled him. He had witnessed their journey, their growth, their transformation. He had played his part, and now it was time to let go. With a final glance at Hope and her cubs, David knew they would face challenges, but he also knew they were equipped to handle them. They were wild, they were free, and they carried within them the enduring spirit of their mother, the legacy of hope. David remained in the valley, his presence a comforting constant in the ever-changing landscape. He continued his work protecting the wilderness, ensuring the safety of its inhabitants. He would always hold a special place in his heart for Hope and her cubs, knowing that they represented the resilience and beauty of nature. As the seasons changed, so did David's understanding of his role in the wild. He had witnessed the power of compassion, the strength of family, and the importance of protecting the delicate balance of life. Hope and her cubs had taught him invaluable lessons that would stay with him forever. In a world where survival is never guaranteed, David found solace in knowing that he had made a difference. Through courage and compassion, he had helped a mother bear and her cubs find their way back to the wild, a small but significant contribution to the enduring spirit of the wilderness. As he prepared for another day in the park, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would continue to fight for the voiceless, to be a guardian of the valley, and to honor the bond he had formed with the wild creatures that called this place home. And so, the story of the grizzly bear and her cubs found hope in a world where love and determination can make all the difference. David's journey had just begun, and he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that he was part of something much greater than himself. With renewed hope and a commitment to protect the wilderness, he ventured forth, ready to embrace whatever the wild had in store for him. And as the sun rose over Yosemite National Park, the spirit of the wild continued to thrive, forever intertwined with the stories of those who cared for it. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you found this story insightful, please subscribe and leave us a like. We would really appreciate that. See you on the next one.